In all the years I've taught about political parties, I've often heard students say something like, boy, if we could just get rid of political parties and everybody vote for the best person, then all of our problems would be solved and our political system would work perfectly. But this idea doesn't really make very much sense. Political parties really, at their heart, are organizational tools that are very useful to both people running for office and to voters. And they make those who use political parties more successful. Let me just talk about this a little bit more. For candidates, running with a party label makes it a lot easier to run for office. There's an organizational structure already in place, and there are sets of voters that we call coalition, parts of the coalition, who are already kind of lined up in support of the party. And so if someone were to say, well, I'm going to run for office, but I don't like political parties, and so I'm not going to have a party label, then every time they meet with a new group of potential voters, they have to really start from zero. They have to say, well, here I am. My name is whatever, and let me tell you my life story and why I'm the best person. And by the time they finish, everyone in the room has sort of fallen asleep or is wondering, okay, there are they an R or a D, a Republican or a Democrat? Um, And so candidates running for office know that they're at a severe disadvantage if they don't use a party label. And so they tend to do exactly that. Also, once they get elected, it's a more efficient vehicle for governing. Passing a law is a very complicated process, and it involves lots of different votes from lots of different people whose constituents might have different interests. And so in order to pass a law, you have to have some agreement from other people whose voters really might not care about that issue very much. And parties turn out to be a really good framework for organizing what we call collective action, or the coordination needed to pass laws. And the same thing happens on the voter side. For voters trying to decide who to vote for, information is a really valuable commodity. It costs a lot of time and effort to inform oneself about every single candidate running for office. And so, and the benefits of all of that additional work are hard to identify. And so many voters look for shortcuts. And this is what Lupia talked about last time in the public opinion section of the course. So we know that voters use shortcuts, and the most widely used shortcut is party label. But it's also easier for voters to hold the people that they elect accountable if they're members of a group. So if you just elect one person because they think they're the best, they're the best person, and then the policies that you'd like to have passed don't get passed, it doesn't really help very much to punish that one person, because one person isn't responsible for passing laws or doesn't have the power to do that. It's groups within Congress that have the organizational capacity to pass laws. And so for that reason, parties are also very useful to voters that are trying to hold elected representatives accountable. Now, for both of these, though, there are big problems. So with candidates, for instance, it's very difficult if parties, are very ideologically polarized and there's not cooperation across party lines, especially in our very fragmented governing system. It's very difficult to pass laws. And so that means that in times of divided government, it's much more difficult to pass laws if the parties are very ideologically different from one another. And we do have a lot more periods of divided government today than we used to. Now, divided government, that term refers to a situation in which one of the three entities that are required to pass a law, either the president or the Senate or the House, are controlled by a different party. And this is a chart is from Wikipedia showing the years in which there's divided government, starting with the 20th century. We have a lot more divided government now than we used to. So if you were to take this chart back to the first 100 years of the country's history, you'd find that almost none of those years were divided government years. In other words, almost all of the years between 1800 and 1900, all three of these entities were controlled by the same party. In the first 30 years of the last century, there were 6 years in which there were divided government. And let me show you what's been happening. So the 30 years after that, we doubled the number of divided government years. And then look at where we are now. Almost every year is a year in which at least one of those three are controlled by a different party. And so if the parties are very far apart, it can be extremely difficult to pass laws. And this is what we call gridlock. It's kind of what's happening right now. So parties can be a drawback, for sure, to governing. And along the same lines, then, when that happens, it's very difficult for voters to hold parties accountable, because if the system is divided, it's hard to figure out how to ascribe blame. So for right now, for instance, the Democrats in Congress are blaming the Republicans in Congress for not allowing anything to happen, and the Republicans in Congress are blaming the president for not allowing anything to happen. So who do the voters blame? Well, it's very difficult to figure that out. There isn't really a good answer. Now, parties, when political scientists study party systems and they look at our party system, there are 4 ways in which our party system is quite distinctive, 4 areas in which it's quite distinctive from other party systems in the world. And I'm going to have slides that talk about each of these. First, we are indeed a 2-party system. Most countries in the world are not. The organization of the political parties is fairly non-hierarchical and decentralized in our system. When we talk about elected officials and how party functions in government, we see that we have a candidate-centered election system as opposed to a party-centered election system. We also have fairly loose discipline in governing. The parties are not very well able to control elected officials once they get into office. And we have a fair amount of polarization between the parties since the 1950s. When you look at the electorate and the way that party works among voters, we see that we have a fairly informal membership structure and fairly loose identification with political parties in our system compared to others. And so let me start off with talking about the 2-party system. We do indeed have a 2-party system, and especially times like this, there's a lot of discussion about why don't we have more political parties? Why can't a 3rd party be effective? And the most important reason for this has to do with this very strong correlation that we see between the type of electoral system and how many political parties are effective in that political party system. We have what's called a winner-take-all electoral system, sometimes called first past the post, sometimes majoritarian. There are lots of different names, but essentially, people run for office, and whoever wins the most votes wins, and everybody else loses. Seems pretty obvious, but it's quite different. There are lots of different other ways to count votes across the world. Let me show you a quick video that